right, Sally. You're under arrest. Sergeant, take her away and book her.
Sergeant, take her away. Sergeant Booker.
Making a hit show is like cooking a great meal. You need the right ingredients. But these next shows got the recipe completely wrong. We're looking at the most hated sitcoms of the 70s and 80s. Believe it or not, a spinoff of one of the biggest shows ever became one of the most ridiculed. 1. All That Glitters. Norman Lear was the king of 1970s television. As the creator of groundbreaking shows like All in the Family and The Jeffersons, anything he touched seemed to turn to gold. So when he announced a new experimental sitcom called All That Glitters, everyone in Hollywood expected another smash hit. But the thing nobody tells you is that this show was one of the strangest ideas ever put on TV. The premise was a complete social flip. It was set in a world where women held all the power. They were the high-powered executives, the breadwinners, and the bosses, while men were the ones who stayed home, raised the kids, and served as secretaries. It was a bold concept designed to be a satire on gender roles. The problem was, it completely forgot to be funny. The show's jokes were weak, and the situations felt more awkward than hilarious. What many overlooked is that audiences in 1977 just weren't ready for it. They tuned in expecting the kind of relatable family comedy Norman Lear was famous for and were instead thrown into this confusing alternate reality. To put it mildly, people were baffled. The show was slammed by critics for its amateurish stereotypes and failed to find an audience. It was canceled after just 13 weeks, proving that a bizarre idea from a genius is still a bizarre idea. A show that was too strange for audiences is one way to fail. But what if a show wasn't strange at all, but was instead so lazy and unfunny that it set a record for being canceled almost instantly? 2. Co-ed fever.
It feels so good to drop a book and have someone in pants pick it up and hand it back to me.
With his phone number written all over the inside cover.
Yeah, I've dropped 9 books already.
Some TV shows get a whole season to prove themselves. Others might get a few months, but Co-ed fever holds the embarrassing distinction of being canceled after just one single episode aired. That's a level of failure that is truly legendary in the television industry. The show was a blatant attempt to cash in on the massive success of the 1978 college comedy movie Animal House. The idea was simple enough, a sitcom set at a women's college that had just opened its doors to male students for the first time. The stories were supposed to revolve around the wacky adventures that followed. Here's the kicker: it wasn't funny, not even a little bit. The show was filled from top to bottom with cheap, lowbrow humor that felt desperate. It had been rushed into production to ride the movie's popularity, and the lack of effort was obvious on screen. The one and only episode that made it to air was so poorly received by the small number of people who watched it that the network pulled the plug immediately. Believe it or not, there were 5 more episodes already filmed and ready to go. The network decided it would be better to just throw them in a vault and pretend the show never existed. Getting canceled after one episode is a huge humiliation. But our next show wasn't just bad. It was also incredibly weird, taking a beloved British comedy star and shooting her into a story that was, quite literally, out of this world. 3. Come Back, Mrs. Noah.
It can be programmed to concentrate on any sound or feature of outstanding interest.
Tell it to stop staring at my bus.
Across the Atlantic in Great Britain, actress Molly Sugden was a comedy superstar. She was famous for playing the hilarious Mrs. Slocombe on the long-running hit show Are You Being Served? With her immense talent and popularity, any new show built around her should have been a guaranteed success, right? Well, that's not what happened with Come Back, Mrs. Noah. This sitcom had one of the most bizarre plots you can imagine. It was set in the year 2050, and a British housewife wins a cooking contest. Her prize is a tour of a new space vehicle. But as you might guess, something goes terribly wrong, and she is accidentally launched into deep space with a small and completely incompetent crew. The show was meant to be a goofy space adventure, but it ended up being just plain bad. The jokes were incredibly old and tired. Many of them felt like they were recycled from other better shows. To make matters worse, the sets and props looked unbelievably cheap, like something from a middle school play. The entire production felt flimsy and poorly thought out. What many overlooked was the sheer talent of the cast, who were trying their absolute best with the terrible scripts they were given. The show was seen as a massive waste of a great comedic actress, trapping her in a spaceship that was going nowhere fast. A sitcom lost in space is one thing, but what about a show that was so poorly written that it has been called one of the worst comedies of all time, created by one of Britain's most celebrated writers? 4. Delilah. Carla Lane was a famous and respected writer in British television. She was known for creating sitcoms with smart dialogue and characters that felt real, like the classic show The Liverbirds. But even the best writers can have a bad day, and Delilah was a very, very bad day. The show starred the wonderful character actress Pat Coombs as Delilah, a kind-hearted maid who works for a quirky family. In her spare time, she would team up with her friend, a local police officer, to solve minor mysteries. It actually sounds like a charming idea, a sort of cozy mystery mixed with a sitcom. The problem was, the scripts were, to put it mildly, appalling. There were simply no laughs to be found. The show felt like it was having an identity crisis. It wasn't clever enough to be a good mystery, and it wasn't funny enough to be a good comedy. It failed miserably at being both. The plots were boring, the characters were thin, and the jokes, on the rare occasion they appeared, fell completely flat. It was a massive disappointment coming from such a talented writer. The show was so disliked that it was canceled very quickly and has been mostly forgotten, except as an example of a good idea gone terribly wrong. A bad show from a great writer is a letdown. Our next show also starred a famous comedic actor, but it was so flat and uninspired that it felt like a lazy attempt to cash in on his fame. 5. Odd Man Out.
How about a boiled egg?
Oh, no, thank you. I couldn't eat an egg. Oh, especially when you think where they come from. Puts me right off.
John Inman was another huge star of British comedy in the 1970s. His flamboyant character on Are You Being Served made him a household name. Naturally, TV producers wanted to give him his own show to star in. That show was called Odd Man Out. In it, he played the owner of a small fish and chip shop. His life gets turned upside down when he inherits his late father's business, a factory that makes rock, which is a type of hard candy popular in the UK. At the same time, he discovers he has a half-sister he never knew existed. The show was designed to be a showcase for John Inman's comedic abilities, but the material he was given was just terrible. The humor was completely flat, and the situations were dull and uncreative. The show felt like it was put together with very little effort. The chemistry between the main characters never developed, and the whole series felt forced and lifeless. It was a clear attempt to capitalize on a popular actor's fame without bothering to write a good show for him to star in. It lasted for only one short series of 7 episodes before being canceled. A forgettable sitcom that proved that a big star can't save a bad script all by himself. Some shows are just forgettable, but our next one was a huge hit in its time that has since become viewed by many as a prime example of lazy, unfunny television. 6. On the Buses.
You can tell our rivers have been polluted. My dear fellow, kippers come out of the sea. But this runs straight a bit, mate. Smell it.
Well, I've been keeping it up for a long time.
That one was up when they caught it.
Let's stick with British television for one more entry. This show, On the Buses, is a strange case because it was actually incredibly popular when it first aired. However, over the years, its reputation has soured, and it is now often pointed to as one of the worst sitcoms of its era. The show was a workplace comedy about a bus driver named Stan and his conductor, Jack. They were two lazy guys who were always trying to get out of doing their jobs and play tricks on their grumpy, uptight boss, Inspector Blake. The humor was extremely basic and repetitive. Most of the jokes revolved around the same few ideas week after week. It was full of one-dimensional characters and predictable situations. While it was a massive ratings hit in the UK for a while, even spawning 3 feature films, it represents a kind of unfunny mediocrity that has not aged well at all. Modern critics and viewers often describe the writing as lazy and the characters as unlikable. Its legacy today is that of a show that, despite its initial success, simply wasn't very good. A show that was popular but bad is a strange legacy. But what if a show was bad for a completely different reason? Because it was made so cheaply and so quickly that it's a miracle it ever got on the air at all. 7. The Trouble with Tracy.
The next thing, my secretary's going to come walking in here and tell me that there's a beautiful blonde outside who is in desperate trouble and needs my help.
There's a beautiful blonde out here to see you. She says she's in desperate trouble.
Sometimes a show fails because of bad writing. Sometimes it's because of bad acting. And sometimes it's because the show was produced on such a tiny budget that quality was never even a possibility. This brings us to The Trouble with Tracy, a Canadian sitcom that has become infamous for being one of the worst TV shows ever made. The story was about a newlywed couple, a smart young ad executive, and his sweet but very silly wife, Tracy, who was always getting into some kind of trouble. The real trouble, however, was happening behind the scenes. The show was made for an astonishingly low amount of money. To cut costs, they filmed an unbelievable 130 episodes in a single year. That's more than most sitcoms produce in 5 or 6 years. How did they manage it? They used every budget hack imaginable. The actors rarely rehearsed and instead read their lines from giant cue cards placed just off camera. If an actor messed up a line, they just kept going because there was no time or money for a second take. Even worse, the plots were often directly copied from old American radio shows from the 1940s. The result was a show with appalling scripts, stiff and unnatural acting, and absolutely zero laughs. Making a show with no money is a recipe for disaster. But what about a show that had all the money and talent in the world behind it? A spinoff from one of the most beloved TV shows in history that still became one of the biggest disappointments of all time. 8. After MASH.
Sorry, I was removing mistletoe from the confessional. Some young couple must have had fun last night.
I'll never do it again, Father.
The television show MASH was more than just a sitcom. It was a cultural phenomenon. For 11 seasons, millions of viewers tuned in to watch the lives of the doctors and nurses at the 40,077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital during the Korean War. Its final episode in 1983 was the most-watched television broadcast in American history, a record that is unlikely ever to be broken. So when the network announced a spin-off, it seemed like a surefire hit. But After MASH proved that you can't always recapture magic. The new show followed 3 of the original characters, Colonel Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulcahy, after the war ended. They all ended up working together again, this time at a veterans hospital in Missouri. The problem was, the heart and soul of MASH was the unique setting, the high-stakes pressure of the war, and the deep friendships formed under those extreme conditions. Without that essential ingredient, the characters just weren't as compelling. The show tried to mimic the original's blend of comedy and serious drama, but the writing just wasn't nearly as sharp. In its first season, the ratings were decent because of sheer curiosity, but by the second season, viewers had lost interest, and the ratings plummeted. Critics labeled it one of the worst spin-offs ever made, a pale imitation of the masterpiece it came from. A failed spin-off of a TV drama is a sad story. But what if a spin-off was so disliked that it became a running joke for comedians all across the country? 9. Hello, Larry.
Yesterday, Ruthie mentioned that she was interested in music.
2 days ago, she said she wanted to jump out of an airplane. Hope you didn't buy her a parachute.
If you were watching TV in the late 70s, you definitely knew the show Different Strokes. It was a huge hit about a wealthy white man who adopts 2 young black brothers. On that show, there was a minor character named Larry Alder, a radio talk show host. For some reason, the network executives decided this character was interesting enough to have his very own spin-off. That show was called Hello, Larry. The plot followed Larry as he moved from New York to Portland, Oregon to host a radio show and raise his 2 teenage daughters by himself. The show was immediately a joke, and not in the way the writers intended. The humor was painfully flat, the storylines were boring, and the character of Larry just wasn't strong enough to carry his own show. It quickly became a punchline for bad television. The legendary late-night host Johnny Carson made fun of Hello, Larry constantly in his monologues. Comedians everywhere used the show's title as shorthand for a total failure. What many overlooked is that the show actually got good ratings at first, but only because it aired right after the super popular Different Strokes. People weren't tuning in to watch Hello, Larry, they just hadn't changed the channel yet. The network tried everything to save it, including crossover episodes with the cast of Different Strokes, but nothing worked. Being the butt of every joke is a tough legacy. Our next show was also a spin-off of a massive hit, and it followed a very simple rule of television. If it works in small doses, don't try to make it the whole meal. 10. Joni Loves Chachi.
I say we're adults. I say we can make our own decisions. I say we leave through the bathroom window.
I'm glad we're adults, Charlie.
Happy Days was one of the biggest and most beloved sitcoms of the entire 1970s. In the show's later seasons, a huge storyline was the romance between the youngest Cunningham kid, Joni, and her fiery boyfriend, Chachi Arcola. They were so popular as a couple that the network decided to spin them off into their own show. The result was Joni Loves Chachi. The series followed the young couple as they moved to Chicago to try and make it big in the music world, starting their own rock band. Because it was connected to Happy Days, the show was a ratings hit when it first premiered. People were curious to see what would happen to the young couple. The problem was the quality of the show itself. To put it mildly, the writing was considered far inferior to Happy Days. The stories were often overly sentimental and cheesy, and the musical numbers that were awkwardly placed in every single episode felt forced and out of place. The show couldn't figure out if it was a sitcom or a low-budget musical. The 2 lead actors had great chemistry, but not even they could save the weak material. Once the initial novelty wore off, viewers started tuning out. The ratings sank like a rock in the second season, and the show was quickly canceled. A spin-off with cheesy writing is one thing. But what about a spin-off that took 2 of the funniest side characters from a hit show and proved they just weren't funny on their own? 11. The Ropers.
Oh, Stanley, they broke the vase your mother gave us. Here's another $5.
Three's Company was a ratings juggernaut in the late 70s, known for its wacky misunderstandings and physical comedy. A huge part of the show's charm was the hilarious, constantly bickering landlords, the grumpy Stanley Roper and his wisecracking wife, Helen. They were so popular that the network decided they deserved their very own spin-off, aptly titled The Ropers. The new show followed Stanley and Helen after they sold their old apartment building and moved into a fancy upscale neighborhood. The main joke was supposed to be about them clashing with their rich, snobby new neighbors. But here's the kicker. The Ropers were hilarious on Three's Company because they were supporting characters. They would pop in for a few minutes, deliver some classic one-liners about their unhappy marriage, and then leave. When you made them the main focus of every episode, their constant bickering went from funny to just plain annoying. The show also lacked the youthful energy and silly plots that made Three's Company a hit. Believe it or not, the show did well enough in its first short season to get renewed. But during the second season, viewers grew tired of the one-note joke, and the ratings took a nosedive. The show was canceled, and it served as a classic example of why some characters are best left on the sidelines. A show about annoying characters is a tough sell. Our next show wasn't annoying, it was just plain weird, featuring one of the strangest and most baffling premises of any sitcom in the entire 1980s. 12. Small Wonder.
Just drop those in the sink, Vicky.
Okay, is that everything?
The 1980s gave us some truly wild and creative ideas, but the sitcom Small Wonder might be one of the wildest. The story centered on a robotics engineer named Ted Lawson. He creates a highly advanced robot that looks exactly like a 10-year-old girl. He brings the robot, whom he names Vicky, home to live with his wife and son, and he tries to pass her off to the world as their adopted daughter. The entire show revolved around the family's attempts to keep Vicky's true identity a secret from their nosy and obnoxious neighbors. The show was, to put it mildly, bizarre. The comedy was supposed to come from Vicky's robotic traits, like her super strength and her habit of taking everything literally. But the jokes were incredibly simple and were often repeated over and over again. The show was produced on a very low budget and was not aired on a major network. Instead, it was sold directly to local TV stations. This meant it lacked the quality writing and polished look of network shows. The acting was often criticized as being stiff, especially from the young actress who had the difficult job of playing a robot. Despite being slammed by critics, the show somehow found an audience, mostly with kids, and managed to last for 4 seasons. For many, though, it remains a symbol of cheesy, low-quality 80s television. A show about a robot child is certainly strange, but our next show was just a classic, poorly written sitcom that was so disliked by critics, it's become a legend of what not to do. 13. We Got It Made.
Oh, tomatoes? You want tomatoes? Here, got tomatoes.
Good thing I didn't ask for watermelons.
Sometimes a show's premise is so thin you can see right through it. That was the case with We Got It Made. The show was about 2 bachelors, a cool, laid-back guy and his nerdy, uptight roommate who live in a fancy apartment in New York City. To help them with their chores, they decide to hire a live-in maid. The twist was that the maid they hired was a gorgeous and naive young woman. The entire show's humor was based on this silly setup. The premise was basically a gender-swapped version of Three's Company, but without any of the charm or clever writing. Critics absolutely lambasted the show from the very beginning. They called it mindless, unfunny, and a complete waste of airtime. The humor was as basic as it gets, relying on silly situations and the attractiveness of the main female character. There was nothing smart or original about it. Despite the terrible reviews, the show actually got decent ratings for a little while, but the network eventually listened to the critics and the show's declining viewership and canceled it. In a strange twist, it was brought back a few years later with a mostly new cast where it failed all over again. A bad show failing twice is quite a feat. But what about a show that tried to bring back a beloved TV family and ended up creating something incredibly stale and boring? 14. The Brady Brides.
We won't look at them. We promise. We don't even like tropical fish.
I don't know if I could live with anyone that doesn't like tropical fish.
The Brady Bunch was the ultimate wholesome family sitcom of the early 1970s. After the original show ended its run, there were numerous attempts to bring the famous family back to television, including a bizarre variety show and several made-for-TV movies. One of the most forgotten of these attempts was a sitcom spinoff called The Brady Brides. The show was launched after a popular TV movie in which the two oldest Brady daughters, Marcia and Jan, had a double wedding and married their respective partners. The sitcom picked up right where the movie left off. Marcia and her new husband, a fun-loving toy salesman, and Jan and her new husband, a nerdy college professor, decide that the best way to save money is to buy a house and all live together. The comedy was supposed to come from the two very different couples trying to coexist under one roof. The problem was, the show felt like a relic from a bygone era. The humor was overly sweet and old-fashioned, even for 1981. It completely lacked the innocent charm that made the original series work and just felt stale and uninspired. The show was a ratings disaster and was canceled after only 10 episodes had been produced. Some shows feel like they belong in the past, but our next show was so far ahead of its time with its style of humor that audiences had no idea what to make of it, leading to its quick cancellation, even though it's now considered a cult classic. 15. Police Squad.
Please go away. I don't want to answer any more of your questions.
We're sorry to bother you at a time like this, Mrs. Twice. We would have come earlier, but your husband wasn't dead then.
Sometimes a show is hated not because it's genuinely bad, but because it's so different and so clever that people just don't get it. That is the incredible story of Police Squad. This show was the brainchild of the same creative team that made the classic comedy movie Airplane. It was a direct parody of the super serious, dramatic police shows from the 1950s and 60s. The show starred the brilliant Leslie Nielsen as the deadpan, bumbling detective Frank Draben. The humor was completely absurd and came at you a mile a minute. There were visual gags happening in the background of every single scene. Characters would say ridiculously literal things with a straight face, and the plots were intentionally silly. The thing nobody tells you is that in 1982, audiences were used to sitcoms having a laugh track to tell them when a joke was supposed to be funny. Police Squad had no laugh track. You had to actually pay attention to catch all the jokes. The head of the TV network at the time famously said the show was canceled because the viewer had to watch it to appreciate it. To put it mildly, they thought audiences were not smart enough for the humor. The show was canceled after only 6 episodes. But here's the wow factor. The creators took the exact same character and humor and turned it into the massively successful Naked Gun movie franchise. A show being too clever is a rare reason for failure. But what about a show that brings back one of the biggest legends in television history for one last go, only for it to become a huge and awkward disappointment? 16. Life with Lucy. Lucille Ball is, without a doubt, the first lady of television. Her show, I Love Lucy, is an immortal classic that is still beloved by millions around the world. So, in 1986, when it was announced that Lucy was returning to weekly television with a brand new sitcom called Life with Lucy, it was a major television event. In the new show, she was cast as a widowed grandmother who moves in with her son's family and becomes a co-owner of their family hardware store. The show was designed to be a throwback to her classic style of comedy, full of wild slapstick and crazy physical gags. But what many overlooked was that television had changed a lot since the 1950s. The kind of broad, over-the-top comedy that made her a star felt dated and out of place in the more realistic sitcom landscape of the 1980s. Lucy, who was now in her mid-70s, was still a brilliant performer, but watching her do the same kinds of pratfalls and zany schemes she did 30 years earlier felt awkward and even a little sad to many viewers. Critics were harsh, not because they disliked Lucy, but because they felt the show was a poor showcase for her legendary talent. The ratings were terrible, and the network canceled it after airing only 8 of the 13 episodes that were filmed. Watching a legend in a bad comeback is tough. Our next show featured a young actor who would become a huge star, but he was stuck in a show with a mean-spirited tone that really turned viewers off. 17. It's Your Move. Jason Bateman is now a hugely successful and respected actor, famous for his roles in shows like Arrested Development and Ozark. But back in the 1980s, he was a popular teen actor, and he starred in a sitcom called It's Your Move. In the show, he played a slick teenage scam artist named Matthew Burton. He was a master schemer who was always pulling elaborate pranks and running cons, often to make life miserable for his mom's new neighbor, who he didn't like. The biggest problem with the show was its surprisingly mean tone. Matthew wasn't a lovable trickster. He was often just plain cruel. His schemes were clever, but they were also malicious. The show was trying to be an edgy, cynical comedy, but it often just came across as unpleasant. The main character was a protagonist that the audience wasn't really supposed to like. This was a very strange concept for a sitcom airing in a family-friendly time slot. While Jason Bateman was praised for his charismatic performance, the show's forced teen angst and nasty spirit just didn't connect with a broad audience. It was canceled after only 1 season. A mean-spirited show is a tough sell, but our next show wasn't mean. It was just a bland and boring TV version of a hit movie that managed to remove everything that made the movie special. 18. Baby Boom. In 1987, the movie Baby Boom, starring Diane Keaton, was a big box office hit. It was a charming and funny story about a high-powered, career-obsessed woman living in New York City whose life is thrown into chaos when she unexpectedly inherits a baby girl. The movie was praised for its smart writing and its funny but honest look at the challenges of balancing a demanding career and motherhood. So, naturally, Hollywood decided it needed to be turned into a weekly sitcom. The television version of Baby Boom starred actress Kate Jackson in the lead role and followed the exact same story as the movie. The thing is, what worked as a 2-hour film felt incredibly thin and stretched out when turned into a weekly series. The bland satire on yuppie culture and the difficulties of being a new parent became very repetitive very quickly. The show lost all of the sharp wit and the emotional heart that had made the movie so special. It just became another generic sitcom about a single parent trying to make it work. Critics were unimpressed, and audiences who had loved the movie didn't bother to tune in for the TV show. It was canceled before it even finished its first season. A bad movie adaptation is one thing, but what about a spin-off of a spin-off, a show with a strange premise that featured not 1 but 2 future superstars in its cast before they were famous? 19. Living Dolls.
I think models should be more like...
You?
Exactly. But then again, there is only one of me. And yet it seems like one too many.
The sitcom Who's the Boss was a massive hit throughout the 1980s. On that show, there was a minor character who was a model. For some reason, the network decided to create a spin-off based on her. That spin-off was called Living Dolls. The plot was about a group of teenage models who all lived together in a house in New York City under the supervision of their modeling agent, who acted as their house mother. The show was disliked for a couple of major reasons. First, the entire premise was seen by many critics and viewers as being a little bit creepy. It was a show about young girls in the often difficult modeling industry, and it frequently felt like it was putting them on display in an uncomfortable way. Second, it just wasn't funny. The jokes were weak, and the stories about the supposed struggles of being a teenage model were not very relatable or interesting. But here is the most shocking detail. The cast was loaded with future A-list talent. The show featured a very young Halle Berry in one of her first ever acting roles. Another one of the models was played by Leah Remini, who would later become a huge sitcom star on The King of Queens. Despite that amazing future star power, the show was a critical and ratings disaster.